Hello, my name's John. This is the 5th Discworld Warhammer 40,000 crossover video, and you're watching Wargames, Models, and Other Hobbies. Hello and welcome back to another video. Today is the 5th video in this Discworld Warhammer 40,000 crossover. This is the first painting video. So in the previous videos, I've done 4 conversions. I've done Wincerind. I've also done Tower Flower, the Xenos Baggage, as well as a Jokero Librarian. In the next few videos I will be painting each of these models, and in this one we're going to start with the first conversion, which was Wincerind. Now, I'm going to do this in a few stages. Starting out with these base colours, I'm going to give the skin a base of Rakarth flesh. His hair is going to be Mournfang brown. I'm going to use a contrast paint of Blood Angels red for his robes and hat. I'm going to use some Yarael yellow for the sash around his waist. Some Grey Knight steel is going to be for the staff. I've got some Skaven Blight dinge for the gloves, a little bit of trim and the boots. And for the belt, pouches, holster, I've got some Rhinox hide. So, let's start painting. So to start with, I'm putting the base colours on. So in this case, it's the colour of Wincerind's skin. So I'm using the Rakarth flesh just to get a little bit of depth straight away. Nice and quick that, as the only bit that is showing now is his eyes and around his nose and forehead. And I'm going to start with the lightest colours. So the next one is going to be the yellow, so I can paint the sash. Now, with these first colours, I'm not too worried if I accidentally go over the edges. If I do, when I do the next colours, I can tidy that up, so I'm not too worried. But what I will do is I'm going to paint alternate colours, so they're not next to each other each time round, so I can give it a little bit of time to dry between paint coats. Now, I've really enjoyed converting these little models. If you've got any ideas of other Discworld Warhammer 40,000 conversions you'd like to see, please drop it in the comments. If you haven't watched any of the previous videos, there'll be a little link down in the description to the playlist that runs through all of them. And if you get a moment, you can go and have a watch. Now, as you can see, I'm not being too careful with the yellow. Pretty much most colours paint over yellow without too much of a problem, so I'm not too worried. This brush is pretty horrendous though, but I've got plenty of others, so I'm not too worried. I can change it out when I go to a different colour. And as you can see, I'm really not being careful while I paint this yellow. It's not something that I'm too worried about at this stage. Just want to make sure I get good coverage of all of those parts. Okay. So I'm going to get on with the other colours and we'll have a look at what it looks like. So there we have the blocked out colour. The contrast paint makes the red a lot easier because it's already built up a few layers of depth with the colour. But I've got to do the same with the yellow sash, as well as the gloves, boots, and the holster with the belt and everything. So to start that, what I tend to do is I go back to the Rakarth flesh, and I will do a bit of a dry brush over the top of it, which picks out some of the detail, and then I wash over the top of that with either Agrax Earthshade or Nuln Oil. And when I do this, I tend to use quite a big brush, because the weathering over the top of this, bringing out those highlights of the different kind of parts of the gloves and things, it doesn't matter if it goes onto other areas, as I'm going to build up different bits of kind of washes and colour over these anyway. So if it means that I end up with a little bit of kind of a knocked back colour here and there, that's alright. So there we go, very quick. And I think what I'm going to do, I'm going to go with the Agrax Earthshade to go over the boots, belt, holster, gloves. And then when that's dry, I'll probably go over it with a Nuln Oil just to add a little bit more depth. So let's get this Agrax on here straight away. And like I said, I don't mind if this goes over other details at the moment, as I will be tidying bits up on the red and the face later on. But I do find this double layer of Agrax Earthshade and then Nuln Oil over the top of it when it's dry does give a real nice depth. Also, I sometimes find if you don't mix Agrax enough, it can be slightly glossy. I know that there used to be a glossy version of it, I don't know if there still is, but I have encountered the non-glossy shade sometimes coming out a little bit glossy. But that Nuln Oil just adds a little bit of depth to it and takes that out. Just realised, I hope you can see this on camera while I'm doing it. I was too busy concentrating on getting the paint in the right place. Now the key thing whenever you're using shades is really let them dry before you go on to the next paints. What you don't want is it to bleed into each other and you end up with a bit of a mess. So as you can see, we're starting to build up a little bit of depth there. What I'm going to do, I'm going to get a little bit of Agrax on the orc skull, just in a few places to start picking out some detail. Especially around the teeth. and then in the eye sockets there. But then the rest of that is going to be Nuln Oil. I think what we will do, let's just want to see what a little bit of Agrax does to the beard. But nope, I'm going to leave that for now. Okay. So what I'm going to do for a little bit is let that dry before I go on to the Nuln Oil. So let's see what that looks like in a minute. Okay, so before I do the Nuln Oil wash over some of the details, what I want to do is pick out any buttons, catches, things like that, and I'm going to put Leadbelcher on those, just to give a little bit of detail. So on the holster we have the Imperial Eagle there. We also have at the bottom of it a little button or a catch, whatever it is. I'm trying to be as careful as possible when I put this on, but as always, I sometimes put a little bit too much on. I've got to get some new brushes soon, so I'll use that as my excuse. Although, can't blame your tools. Well, you can. Okay, I think I'll also do the ones on there, as well as this little box. Just there. Now I am aware that there's the eye of the Psykers just on it there, but I think I'm going to do that gold, and that'll be one of the last details I do. So looking at that, by the time, because it's quite warm, by the time I've put Nuln Oil on some of the other areas, and then got to those bits I've just painted, they should be dry-ish. So I'm going to start with the staff, which I just want to knock back slightly, and I'll do this foot at the same time. Now I might, as I do a few other bits of the model, go over a few sections again, either in this video or just after it, but getting that Nuln Oil on there works really nicely just to knock it back slightly. Got to be really careful of the yellow, because that can quite easily be kind of knocked back and become a bit too kind of dirty if I'm not careful. I need to make sure that I don't get too much Nuln Oil on it, but around the edges it's okay. It is one of my favourite paints, just with how it picks out detail and allows things to look just a little bit, I don't know, Does something to them, doesn't it? So I'm picking a few bits out on the skull. I might go back over that with a bit of white later on. But for now, this is okay. Let's get some in the back of the jaw. There we go, cool. Okay, let's run some over there. Again, I'm not paying attention to the camera, so I don't know if this is in shot or not, so apologies if any of it hasn't been. Do my best to make sure it stays in shot. So far, even though there's been cuts in this video, it is one sitting so far. Just had to wait for things to dry as I was working, but if I do stop this evening, I'll just cut it in the video. There is a really annoying fly going around, so I apologise if you can hear that. What I was saying was, yeah, for you there won't be much difference in the video, but for me it might end up being tomorrow that I finish a few other bits. Just run some null oil on the red for now, just to get a few. Okay, right, I'm going to let that null oil dry before I go on to the next stage. Okay, so the null oil is on and dry. I did on the yellow use some old Griffin Sandfire just to add a little bit of depth before I go on to the next stage of that. But for now, what I want to do is work on the robes a little bit. So I did start off with the Blood Angels red contrast paint. What I'm going to do now is a little bit of Evil Sun Scarlet in a few places. I want to get an appropriate brush for this. There we go. So one of my broken toads, but it's a little bit broken, but that's what I want. I'm looking to just bring out a few details. I want it to look a little either worn or threadbare, not quite kind of. I don't want an even colour over it, so I've got this first to go on in places, and then I'm gonna mix it with some Rakarth flesh just to start getting some different tones. And then what I want to do is muddy it up slightly, but let's just get some of this colour. Apologies if you can hear that fly. I tried to get rid of it while the null oil was drying, but it's persistent. Okay, so there's the first bit of red there. What I'm going to do as well, I'm going to go for some Wild Rider red, which is more of an orange, and just going to use this stubby little old dry brush to get a little bit of kind of worn colour in places. I don't know if it quite comes out on camera how I'm looking for it to come out, but it's just a little bit of playing around with the colour itself and the depth of it. If you want to see more painting videos, not only the Discworld related ones, please drop it in the comments. If you're liking my content, consider following the channel, subscribing. It's just part of my hobby, and I am enjoying the contact I have with people through this, with the odd comment and things like that. Right, I'm gonna grab one of these brushes and I'm gonna get a little bit of the Rakarth flesh and I'm going to mix it with the red that I've got in my palette. Now I tend to have, there it is, I have a dry palette. I prefer a dry palette mainly because that's what I learnt to paint with. I kind of don't really get on with wet palettes, but it's my own personal preference. Everyone can use whatever they want. I do like just mixing colours together to see what I can get. I do enjoy matching colours and trying to get things the same. But now I was thinking of trying to put on Psyker stitched onto the hat. So he's not a wizard, he's a psyker, but I think I'll just leave that for now. I might do it in a future adaptation to this model. No, I'm happy with the way that's turning out now. I think when I do the base, I will add a few specks of dirt and things to it. But next step, I'm going to add, I've got some Avalan Sunset. Although it's a base paint, I just want to add a few bits to the belt. Just to add a little bit of another yellow to what we've already got. Okay. Right, let's get a bit of this gold. I'm going to put that. Ooh, that needs a proper shake. I'm going to put it on the insignia And also put a little bit of trim in gold with the yellow of the belt and everything. So let's okay. Just going to add a little bit of gold onto the fringing, which I will actually, let's just run a little bit through the yellows just to add a little bit of shine to it and sparkle. Okay, so here is Wincerind so far. I've still got to work on the face and beard, and I want to make sure everything's dry before I do that. So I'm going to leave it for a little bit before moving on to the next step. So, okay, while I was waiting for it to dry, I decided to add a bit more colour. So I've mixed Corax white with some corn red, just to start adding, you can see on the bottom here, a little bit of weathering of the fabric. Just adds a little bit of age. As it's not always going to look its best, is it? And what I'm going to do now, I'm going to get some little bit of contrast paint, and on my palette I'm going to mix that in with the paint that I've just put together, just to go over the top of those bits to add even more depth in places. I'm liking how that's turning out. I mean, what I might need to do is knock it back with a matte varnish, but I don't know yet. I might just see how it turns out. There we go. Okay, now I'm going to let this dry and then we'll get on with the next stage. Okay, so we're at the stage where I want to paint the face and the beard and finish off all the colours. Annoyingly, my Kislev flesh has dried out because I left the lid off quite stupidly, but I've got some Cadian flesh tones, but it's a little bit too dark for what I want. So what I'm going to do is paint a bit of a white base over the Rakarth flesh that I used, because it's not the right kind of colour that I'm looking for, and at the same time I'm going to add a little bit of detail with some Reekland flesh shade, and then I'm going to pick out with Cadian flesh tone, but I might mix a bit of white in with that. So let's get started. And the reason why I want to use some white is I want to put white in the eyes so I can try and add some pupils. And it's often easier to add the pupils before you do the skin on smaller models like this. Okay, so that's the white. I've pretty much covered the Rakarth flesh. It wasn't something that I was going to really need in the end. So, the next stage, just wondering, because the eyes are so small in this one, I don't think we're going to worry about pupils on this. So let's get some Reikland Flesh Shade. And let's see how that goes over the white. It's a little bit dense around the eyes, so just going to knock that back slightly. Okay. That's okay for now. So while that flesh shade is still wet, I'm just going to mix up some Cadian flesh tone with some white, just to get a little bit of colour in places. So it's going to kind of merge together and that kind of thing, but for this size, oh sorry, I'm way off the camera there. For this it's going to be okay. Okay. So on my list to get, I need to get some new flesh tones. What I need now is a light brown, and I'm hoping I've got something. I think that'll work. Actually, no, there we go. I'm going to use some Kachan flesh. Kachan. As Rincewind and his contemporary here, Wincerind, has brown hair, so I'm going to go for a brown beard there. It's actually quite useful having this on the camera because it does show the odd little spot that isn't quite covering. Okay, there we go. Gonna get a little bit of pink into there, some flesh tone. Clean that up a little bit. Okay. Excuse me. Okay, so the final thing I'm going to do with some Nuln oil on a small brush. I'm going to use this to highlight the eyes slightly, just to get a little bit of depth in there and bring out some of the details. I mean, down the line what I might do is So, you know, the eyes are so small, I'm not going to even worry about trying to do the pupils on those, but we'll do a little bit of null all around the face. There we go. Okay, so it might not come out on the screen, but I have actually done pupils in Wincerind's eyes, and I'm kind of happy with where this paint job's gone to now. Yes, there's a little bit of shine, but I can knock that back with a matte varnish later on. What I'm going to quickly do now is work on the base. So to do that, what I'm going to do what I'm going to start with is some Stirland mud, and I'm going to paste that round using one of the texture tools, and I'm going to paste that round on the base. So this isn't the only detail I'm going to put on the base. I am going to put a little bit of grass, I think, to match with the death of rats. But what I want to do with this is let it dry quite naturally. So I'm going to get this on and then leave it for a while to dry. With the more texturized, gritty basing paint like this, if you force dry it, it can end up becoming a little bit smooth, which isn't necessarily what you want. But I just want to paste this round on the base, making sure that I'm going up to the feet and just filling all of the little gaps. So that's all under there. And I'm going to do a nice simple paint scheme with this once it's dry, but we'll have a look at that when it is dry. So, okay, that's got the Stirland mud in place. So what we're going to do now is just let this dry and go on to the next stage. Okay, so that Stirland mud is now dry. And this is where I just do a really simple finish to this. A quick dry brush of Rakarth Flesh. You'll realise it's one paint that I use quite often. Having that off-white, brown, light brown tone paint works really well to do weathering, pick up details and that kind of thing. So a quick dry brush with this. And I'm going to go on to the rock as well that I've painted. And the key thing with this dry brush is I don't really want to get it all over the place, just over the Stirland mud. If it does go on the boots a little bit, that's okay. But we just bring that over the whole thing like that. That quick and easy. And then I'm going to do a wash of Agrax Earthshade followed by Nuln Oil. So I just want to make sure I've got a big enough brush to do this in kind of like one go, really. I'll just use one of these ones. Yeah, it's not the biggest brush, but I'll use it. Now I'm going to have to get some new brushes soon. So this wash is going to go over the top of the dry brush. And I like to do the two washes, so the Agrax followed by the Nuln Oil, to just give a little bit of depth to the colour. And you'll see that I'm going over the rock that I sculpted on the base, and it's just giving a slightly different tone over the top of that white base coat. But yeah, I'm not really being too careful when putting this on. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to let this dry, paint the Nuln Oil on, and then paint the rim of the base. So, see you in a minute. And here we go. There is Wincerind. Now, one last thing I want to do. I've let the base dry. I did give it a wash of Agrax Earthshade, then Nuln Oil, and then a light dry brushing in places with more Rakarth flesh, just to pick out a few details. But what I want to add is some grass. So not too much, just maybe 1 or 2 little stumps, little bits of turf. So I just pull it off the backing paper with some tweezers, and I'm just going to push it in place. It has a little bit of a glue dot on it. You can remove them once you've put them on as well. So there's one, and I think I'm going to maybe put a few more on. Let's see how. I'm actually going to get that one, and I'm going to cut it in half. So I now have 2. Let's grab the one that pinged off the screen. Just going to stick that one down there. And then this other small one. Oops. There we go. Stick that just on the back there. Let's pull some of the loose bits off. Okay, so that's it. That is Wincerind, the Warhammer 40,000 Discworld Psyker, complete. Now in the next video I will be painting Tau Flower, the Tau Watercast Tourist. Now if you're enjoying these videos, please consider a like and subscribe. You can chuck a comment down below for other models you want to see converted in this style. But for now, all I can say is thank you so much for tuning in. My name's John, and you've been watching War Games, Models, and Other Hobbies.